So much has been said about the energy economy. We welcome you now to the panel on breaking the barriers to the energy economy. Our moderator for this session, whom many of you met just a minute ago, is a John S. Knight Fellow at Stanford University and a former reporter, columnist, and senior writer for the New York Times, where he served as an assistant science editor and assistant financial editor. He joined Fortune magazine as a senior editor and columnist covering consumer technologies. And he was a featured moderator at last year's Turning the Tide. Please welcome back to the stage, Peter Lewis.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you all for being here. You know, for all the talk about climate change, I wish we could just sort of bottle what we have outside and keep it this way without change for a little bit. What a beautiful day. What a beautiful facility. Thank you so much, Howard. Thank you, Greg, out there. There you are. Thank you, everybody who's involved with us, for pulling together this wonderful conference again this year. Quick housekeeping things, like on previous panels you've heard, this is a panel for these guys and for you folks, and I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for Q&A, so I'm going to keep introductory comments to a minimum and just say that I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, say 90 seconds or so, and talk about what they are most passionate about, what gets them up in the morning to think about this whole idea of energy. So,
sure. My name is Scott Sun. I'm the VP of Project Finance at SunTech. SunTech is a global leader in the solar PV manufacturing business, roughly about $2 billion of annual revenues. What I'm most passionate about, what my job at SunTech is finding ways to deploy solar more efficiently and effectively, and it's a challenge. But that's a challenge that I'm eager to take on, and hopefully we can find creative ways to get solar out there.
Have we hit grid parity in California yet?
It depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Depends on whose math you use.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ted Howes. I lead design work at IDEO. We're a global innovation and design firm. And I think the thing that I'm right now most passionate about is, in the energy space, one of the things that's missing is that consumer engagement piece. We're a human-centered design firm. We really think about people's unmet needs and desires. And then from that, we start to design solutions. And so within that, I think one of the things, once you get past engagement and awareness, how do you motivate people to change? And so we've been thinking a lot about behavior change, behavioral economics, ways to integrate that into interaction design, into device design, so people can have something that they can understand, visualize, contextualize their energy usage, and then it helps them shift and change behaviors in a way that they want to. So I'm deeply passionate around behavior change.
Cree?
Yeah, I'm Cree Edwards, and I'm a founder of a company called eMeter, and previous to this, founder of a company called CellNet Data Systems. And what I'm passionate about from a career standpoint is trying to make it. One of the big barriers to change in the energy industry is the electric utilities. They're very difficult to work with, and there's a lack of transparency in the electric transactions. And I think this impacts both of these gentlemen, but what we do is we have a software package that the electric utilities use to begin integrating high-resolution data from consumers. The whole smart metering program is the start of that, which leads into the smart grid. And what we're very interested in doing is making the utility infrastructure, which today has little or no transparency, open to more innovative, creative people. People who want to put solar out there, people who want to present information to consumers so they can be smarter consumers. Electric vehicles and supporting that on the existing grid. But a lot of the innovation we're seeing today will have a natural barrier if more transparency isn't created and a market isn't created. There is no relationship today between supply and demand. In any other marketplace, if supply increases or if demand increases, supply will be impacted in the signal we've sent to the population through price. For electric utilities, supply and demand vary by time, and there is no information to allow anybody to vary price based on time. So it's a sort of a broken market. So our objective is to provide software tools, information tools for the electric utilities, but also for people who want to use that to build marketplaces in the energy industry.
I'd like to drill down on the smart grid.
Uh-oh.
But there are, 5 million or so smart meters in California right about now?
They aren't quite smart. They're automated, but to become smart, you've got to be able to collect the data and deliver it to people. So that's the step that hasn't quite been made yet. Yeah.
Okay. My impression of this is that your company is selling the software that hopes to tie together this network. And if you think of the smart grid as sort of a separate internet, then you're doing the protocols, the applications that sit on top of that smart grid. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's also the big gap here in California, you're seeing some of the problems, is getting all of that new data to the electric utility to be delivered reliably to consumers. And the gap there is they don't have the processing engines at the back end to take millions of transactions of data, and they're having problems. So what we do is we organize that for them, make it available to their billing systems, which are old, make it available to smart guys who are creating interfaces to consumers so they can use it, and having the whole thing more flexible, time to market for new products and services shortened. But we're sort of the back office nuts and bolts and all that.
Are there standards for smart grid? None.
None.
That's a problem.
Big time.
Okay.
Try to get standards.
You mean standards in terms of data management?
Yeah, the communications with electric utility standards on how you interface and get data into them and then out to other people. It's all over the place.
So if Scott's putting solar panels on the roof and you're trying to help people understand the smart pads on the control panels in their homes, there has to be a standard for those things to work so that different utilities can share information.
And within the home there is. I mean, there's a Zigbee wireless protocol that does exist, but there are variants of Zigbee which creates its own inherent problems. It's supposed to create a mesh network, and it semi-meshes, to be fair.
Semi-meshes. Okay. One of the things that struck me about this conference was that we spent a lot of time thinking about, say, electric cars, different, how to conserve carbon footprint and everything for transportation, various things. But it's buildings, it's houses and office buildings that are really contributing the most to our climate problems. Is that correct?
Well, on a bunch of levels, yeah. I mean, whether you're talking about concrete, which I think, depending on whose math you want to talk about, it's 70% of global CO2 is in concrete, and in terms of emissions. So just the process of building is one thing, and then the other part is you have an amazing amount of building stock, which is old and hasn't been built to current codes in terms of efficiency standards. So the challenge is, how do you start to swap that out? How do you do energy efficiency retrofits? But there's an even deeper problem, which goes to that engagement piece, is when we looked at residential energy efficiency, we did a big project for the Department of Energy trying to connect energy efficiency to people's needs, because they came to us and said, look, energy efficiency fundamentally isn't sexy, because we have ROI positive in terms of energy efficiency technologies. It's all ready for prime time, but people aren't adopting that. Why aren't they adopting it? What's the challenge? And so they gave us the challenge to make it sexy. We failed miserably, because energy efficiency, as anybody here knows, is fundamentally unsexy. But what we did find was there are ways of leading with things that are much more profound emotional motivators, whether it's community, aesthetics, family, things that help people want to engage in energy efficiency. And then the other piece is there tends to be this blanket message all the time around energy efficiency. And what we found is it's actually really, you need to find those moments that matter to people, because that's when you can get energy efficiency into the conversation, whether it's moving into a new home, whether it's having a baby, whether it's getting married, kids going away to college. All of those moments of change are opportunities to bring energy efficiency into people's lives. And those were things, and so we created a strategy and a toolkit for the DOE to work through its partners to take these ideas of human-centered design, human needs in terms of energy efficiency, and help it to scale.
Scott, here's your chance to make PV sexy.
Oh well, I don't need to make PV sexy. It's for various reasons on its own. It's sexy. People seem to be attracted to the idea of PV for many reasons. But the fundamental issue with PV is sure, it's sexy. People like it. But if you want to get it out on a mass scale, you have to make it cheaper, right? That's the big issue for PV. There are a lot of early adopters. There is grid parity with rebates and other incentives. So on an economic basis, I think you can make it. It makes sense to a lot of people. In the city of San Francisco, it might be a little bit difficult because it's a lot of fog and the roof space is small. But in many areas of California, if you've got the rebates and if you've got the tax credit, it makes a lot of sense on an economic basis. But and the early adopters, they'll do it without, whether it makes sense from an economic basis or not. But fundamentally, you have to get the price of PV really low. People don't care about the true cost of energy, what I would call the true cost of energy. We saw I don't know how many people died in the coal accident, right? It's crazy if you think about this. People don't care if people die. They don't value human life as long as they can pay a 1 or 2 cents per kilowatt cheaper for their coal as opposed to solar, right? People aren't going to die from solar. You just leave it out there. But it's interesting. So the cost of PV is getting down there. That's a challenge for me and the rest of the PV industry to get PV cheap enough where it's cost competitive on a just out-of-pocket kilowatt-hour basis. That's our challenge because people are short-sighted by nature.
Peter, one thing on that, the cost effectiveness is because electric utilities can't actually charge the real price of energy, which varies dramatically over a 24-hour period. They average price it. There's $200 billion in utility assets that are used less than 100 hours a year. Now that cost is distributed out over the grid. It's used to cover peaking periods. Well, those peaking periods are the times when the solar energy is most capable of contributing. Mm-hmm. If the actual cost to the consumer of that peaking facility were passed along, there would be a marketplace for solar, even if the prices there are today.
Well, there are in time of use.
It's just starting there. They're doing that based on fuel costs rather than grid overhead costs. So there's lack of transparency in this marketplace that stifles some innovation to cover some of the big challenges, which is peaking energy. And that's got to be opened up so that guys that have interesting technologies can get out there and sell into a natural marketplace that doesn't need to be subsidized.
And that's something that you're trying to help.
That's the area that we're working in. There are lots of components involved in that, but yeah, it's something that the deregulation process in California in the late '90s would have worked if they had enough information on the customer usage so that people could come out and provide packages about in time of use and critical peak pricing and things like that that they could differentiate themselves. That same infrastructure doesn't exist today, and it needs to get out there to help support electric vehicles. You can't plug in electric vehicles everywhere without the grid falling apart. They've got to be able to manage all these things inside the existing environment, and that hopefully will make it easier for these guys to do bigger things right at the coalface.
Okay. The title of this thing is talking about barriers, and there are plenty of barriers to this new energy economy, but one of the things I would like to do, just for my own benefit here, is to find out how my life is going to change when we finally get across this barrier, when we get a smart grid that has two-way communication between the utility and the homeowner, when there's a way to do things like off-peak, how to schedule my energy usage, how I can use my solar panel to return energy to the grid, et cetera. Do you guys want to talk about how, take me out 5-10 years, or whenever you think this is going to happen?
I think that you'll see it, and I'm not able to do that. There are people out there that probably can, but I'll tell you, I bet you see the same level of change in products and services and lifestyle that we've seen over the last 20 years in the telecom industry. I think once you open this thing up to smart entrepreneurs in there and informed consumers, you're going to see things take off that we can't even imagine today. And I think that the biggest barriers to get over the sort of legacy situation that we're in today it's creating a almost impossible marketplace for guys like these. But I think you're going to see some amazing new technology and innovation once those markets can develop naturally.
I think for solar, one of the key issues for us is it's a smart grid and transmission, right? So there's the utilities that mandate, or that, they require that if you want solar, you have to put it on your roof, right? You can't have solar out in Modesto where you can generate more electricity, and you can't connect that system to the grid and then have PG&E sell it to you. You have to put it on your roof. And so what if your roof is old and you have to get a new roof? And so for many reasons, or what if your roof isn't big enough? Or what if it's facing north? That's not good for you. Everyone should have the ability to get solar, and why can't you put it out in the Central Valley and have it connect to the utility and then have it routed to you? That's more efficient. That's more effective. And maybe 5-10 years from now we'll get over that hurdle. But I can see, why can't you have a 5-gigawatt farm out in the Central Valley, and that services thousands of homes in San Francisco? Why can't you transmit through PG&E? It's because of the smart grid. It's because of the utilities. But that's one of the big hurdles for us. It's more efficient if you can build a big farm, one big farm. To construct that, it's cheaper than having 3 or 4 people go up on your roof and try to work through roofing issues.
Ted?
So once you get past the regulatory, political, policy, economic, and technological issues, what does it look like? I mean, I think that's where it gets really interesting, because people often talk about the technology of smart grid, but one of the things they don't really talk about as much is what does a smart grid enable, which is what I think you're getting to, right? Which is what kind of experiences does it enable for people? How might communities start to generate their own power, share power with other communities, store power in other communities? And so it creates these new kinds of transactions and these new relationships with energy, which are fundamentally unexplored right now. And I think that's what gets really exciting, because if you can have that and start to think about not just solar, apologies, but other technologies
absolutely.
for storage and generation and understanding your power usage, and you can start distributing it and sharing it across neighborhoods and communities, well, then it becomes an entirely different experience for people. It becomes something that's of theirs, that it's their power. And I think that's a really, really powerful theme that's currently missing in the conversation.
How are you going to change that?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think there's some interesting. I think the barriers are emblematic of the challenge, and utilities. One great example is you just look at trying to get smart meters out. Well, there's already a lot of pushback in the smart meter rollout in California, in Dallas, and in Houston this summer, where people in the utilities fundamentally looked at the smart meter rollout as being just a meter swap out rather than this change in relationship with energy. And so now there's this pushback, and we're going to see that magnified across the United States. And so you're going to start to see these rollouts get delayed or altered. And so just getting past that barrier of getting the meters out there that start to enable the smart grid is the beginning of it. So I think what you're going to start seeing is people are going to start have to think about what are the services, what are the touch points for the consumer to get it right, to create that adoption. So they have some sense of desiring this, because right now it's being pushed onto the consumer, and then being told, here, you get a meter, and then all of a sudden they find, well, wow, I'm paying a lot more than I thought I was going to, and wow, the man is sticking it to me, which is generally how the utility is viewed. So, I mean, I think there's a lot to get past there.
Anybody out there from Bakersfield?
I'd like to say one thing about the smart metering thing. We're doing the same thing around the world. In Toronto, when you install a meter, you don't just install a meter and nothing else happens. You give them a password to a website. They can go the next day and look at their loads. They can disaggregate that and see what different apply. You give people something. Mm-hmm. What they've done in California is they throw smart meters out there because they can rate base them and earn on them. And they've not gone to the next step, which is give something to the consumer that he can use to begin valuing that investment. And it's a marketing disaster, and
What would you give them? An iPad? Would you?
Absolutely. You give them access to a website. On that website is their 2 years of their historical energy usage, and then what they used yesterday by 15-minute increments. The marginal cost is zero, and so the guy can actually go there and look at it. They go, wow, I turn my broiler on at 5 p.m. and this is the economic cost of it. My pool pump's running, and they can start then making decisions about how they want to see that data. They want Google delivering it. They want Microsoft delivering it. I mean, and then you begin engaging them in something that's personal to them. It's their bill, and maybe 10% of the people you take out first, maybe more.
And then if you get it to that granularity as well, then you can start, the utility can start making smarter decisions in terms of investing in energy efficiency in people's homes, creating new kinds of partnerships to deliver on that experience for people. So, I mean, I think that making it, that transparency, making it relevant to people, and then the partnerships that evolve from that are critical.
Okay. The reason I asked about Bakersfield is that it was one of the early smart meter installations in the state, and a lot of blowback from consumers on that one. It wasn't handled very well.
If you could write a story on the wrong way to start the program, that would be it. That'd be the case study.
Okay.
There are actually a couple of cities.
Question out there.
I'm wondering if you guys could speak to the storage issue of this. It seemed like we're talking a lot about the customer interface and the front end. I know enough maybe to make me dangerous, but it just seems like the storage problem of renewables is such an issue. And I think you spoke a little bit to transmission, but I live in Colorado. There's a lot of wind there. I'd love to hear about maybe some of the solutions out there in storage and transmission specifically.
Scott?
Yeah, there isn't right now. There isn't a good solution. There's battery technology, fuel cell technology. For solar thermal, there's molten salt, but there's not a good solution out there for solar. I can tell you that there isn't.
Molten salt?
For solar, it's solar thermal. It's a different kind of. It's not PV technology, but it's
photovoltaic.
PV is solar thermal is different. It uses steam. And heat. So, but there isn't a good solution. There are companies that are looking at batteries and fuel cells for large-scale solar, but you're right. Right now there isn't a good solution. There's some companies out there like A123 that recently went public that are looking at providing that kind of solution, but it's not out there. But that's an issue for us.
Start a business, be a billionaire.
ICE, you probably heard of in Colorado. Storing ice, basically.
Yeah.
How do you store it that way?
Natural thermal storage.
Yeah, they apparently have gotten some big contracts, 9-figure contracts.
But the challenge with for utilities, go back to the utility side with solar and wind, is it's an intermittent load. It's not predictable.
Right.
So what they need to be able to do is match those new loads with demand side programs, so they have the ability to incent customers not to use as much when those loads drop offline. And there needs to be, that's a whole supply and demand relationship's got to become more interactive.
The ice energy, it's kind of distributed. I mean, you put it on. I mean, if you want to really solve this thing, you got to have storage on a large utility scale, and ice energy doesn't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Question down here in the.
I would like to invite you to expand how you're looking at your consumer and how you can introduce this new technology to them in a way that really makes a difference. And I'd like to give you a very specific example. There are many people that are very concerned about their rivers, the health of their rivers, the loss of the fisheries, and getting these dams off of our rivers. And you can do that with this technology if you tie it in. Now, what they're going to get is not just they're saving money, but they're really interplaying with or you are interplaying with the environment and its effects on us. And you could contribute. The contribution you could make would be enormous, just enormous, not only educationally, but actually on the ground doing it. So, out of the box, boys.
Well, no, I mean, I think one of the things I love about what you're saying is, one of the things is, I mean, fundamentally for individuals, electricity is this magical, invisible force that comes out of the wall, and they pay somewhere between, depending on where you are, 8 and 16 cents a kilowatt hour for it, and that's about the limit of the engagement. And so if you start to think about those, like I was talking before around energy efficiency, more emotionally resonant themes, you've identified one that may have, these great intended consequences that we could start to leverage. I think that's exactly the kind of thinking. The challenge is, if you're going to get people to engage in this stuff, it's got to be really easy, and that's the part that we've missed so many times before. I mean, programmable thermostats, anyone? I mean, they were so fundamentally unsuccessful that Energy Star, for whatever its flaws, ended up delisting them because people would just override them. And so when we recently designed an in-home display device for a clean tech startup. And really we thought really long and hard about what was that onboarding experience for people, so they could start in small ways, and the device learns about their behavior and then starts to prompt them and starts to give them feedback. And all of that interaction design, the intent is to bring them on board in terms of the use of the device in a way that they feel comfortable with, and then over time it starts to feed back and create the kind of reductions that we need to see if we're going to accomplish what you're talking about.
I think the challenge for us is we need to be able to demonstrate with clarity what the true cost of electricity is. If you're buying if you're buying coal, it's not just you're paying 7, 8, 9 cents a kilowatt hour, right? You know, there's emissions associated with coal. If you're buying nuclear, the cost of decommissioning that nuclear power plant isn't included in your kilowatt hours. We need to educate the consumer and let them really know what the cost of their electricity really is. It's not just $150 a month. It's much bigger than that, and we need to do a better job of that.
And one last thing is what's interesting, when you start getting people involved in this, they've done 1 million studies which don't necessarily work out well for the electric utility, but as soon as you start giving customers more information, the first thing you see is a 5 to 10% conservation effect. The intellectual connection between a light bulb and it's amazing what happens. And then you take it further back up the supply chain to, we're damming rivers to do this, and to a lot of people that has some value.
Nick, back.
Here in Marin County, there's just been underway is the decision to create the Marin Energy Authority, the MEA. So it's been very controversial, and PG&E has come down pretty hard on a PR campaign to why it doesn't make sense. But to your point, Cree, that one of the barriers are the utilities. Do you think this is a good move? Do you think that dealing with, say, the MEA in this case could represent potential breakthroughs in this kind of relevant information?
The challenge here isn't the utilities. They're smart people, the guys running the utilities. The problem is the incentives they have are misaligned. They make more money by being less efficient because they need to build more power plants, which they can put in their rate base and they earn on them. So I think what's happening in Marin is a really interesting case study. It leads to a bigger problem, which is we need to get our regulatory agencies aligning the incentives of the utilities with ours as individuals and communities. They should be rewarded for us being more efficient rather than penalized. And that natural conflict there creates barriers that are almost invisible to us that become insurmountable when you get into the court of public opinion and into the legal process. But yeah, I think what's happening in Marin is terrific, and it raises the issue to how much control can be ceded to the local communities and to the people. And it's a public policy issue that's huge. And
should utilities be regulated?
They need to be re-regulated. There's got to be different incentives. There has to be some regulation, but it's not what we have today was put in place in 1920 so that you'd run a wire to Farmer John's house. You earn on every asset. You buy an office chair, you earn 12% after tax. That's not how we should be incenting an industry has this large of an impact on us. And if that can change, then all of our worlds become much, much easier to deal with.
Okay. Other questions out here?
I actually want to abuse the fact that I'm holding the mic right now.
Sing a song.
So you mentioned that economics is part of the issue, figuring out the true cost. The other end is the behavioral end. And we've heard a lot so far about incentivizing an individual consumer on smoothing out their electricity use, reducing a little bit. But this conference is also about scaling up these ideas and making large-scale change. So in terms of large-scale consumption patterns and even what's necessary, with these e-meters being rolled out and some of these communication devices, has there been a lot of thought so far into how to disseminate some of that information on a community-wide scale and on a larger scale so people can see even how they rank compared to other people around them? And the context that I put in that is I know a professor in Arizona has done some studies on that specific issue showing that when you can relate to other people, that there's a dramatic behavior effect.
Yeah, the professor you're talking about is Bob Cialdini, who wrote Psychology of Influence, Psychology of Persuasion, something like that. He's actually the chief science officer for a company called O-Power, which was formerly Positive Energy. And they're doing really neat work where it's super, super low tech in terms of what they're doing. They're actually doing mailers to individual residences. But behind that is a lot of technology in terms of an engine for communicating that. So it gives people understanding of their power relative, their consumption relative to their neighbors. And what they found was kind of interesting at first. When they had the mean and people were below the mean, people would say, well, or below the average rather, they'd say, well, I'm using less than the average, so therefore I feel permission to use more. And so they put a smiley face next to that to encourage people to keep consuming less. And that has been found to show 2.5% to 3% demand reduction, which is huge from a utility
smiley
standpoint.
face?
There you go.
It's a smiley face.
Cool.
So
What does a gold star get?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know whether they tested that. The thing is, what I find really inspiring about that is we like to think of ourselves as rational actors, that we make rational choices all the time. But fundamentally, we also, when we think about ourselves, we don't do it. We make irrational choices all the time. And ideas like this, incorporating behavioral economics, is a way to get past our irrationality. And in some respects, people look at it as taking advantage of it, but I think in this case, it's taking advantage in a sound and beneficial way. So I think you're going to see, O-Power is scaling a lot. They're working, I think, with 25 utilities now. They've got over 2 million customers through the utilities. You're going to see models like that start to emerge, but in order for that to really happen, the data that you're talking about in terms of transparency has to be liberated. Right now, it is restricted. Right now, the way the utility commissions and utilities are looking at data is positively 1970, 55, whatever. Pick a number. But it's pretty far back, and so you really have to make that data available for us to start taking advantage of applications like what you're talking about, and to bring it to scale.
What's the most important thing that we can do as consumers to help push this vision of the future forward?
I don't know if we can do it as individuals, but it gets back to aligning incentives in a regulatory industry in a way that makes sense. Let these guys make more money by making it more efficient, by producing less carbon, by using less energy. I mean, let them make some money on that stuff. We benefit coming out the back end, and until that happens, there's always going to be a natural resistance that they have to change. And that natural resistance manifests itself in things that should take weeks, take years to accomplish. Standards that should be created in a year take a decade. And until all of the players are heading in the same direction here, I think we're going to have the world's largest industry dragging their feet.
What organization in the government regulates?
The Public Utilities Commission.
Okay.
And the challenge here versus telecom, they deregulate on a federal level. They re-regulate on a federal level. Every state has responsibility for their own jurisdictions. So it's the California Public Utility Commission is one that needs to, I think, understand that we as consumers don't want to punish the electric utilities for helping us. They should be rewarded for helping us, and there needs to be a change there. I don't know what it is. It's far too complicated to figure out how do you get from here to there, but some economists ought to figure that out.
I think we need to demand environmental sustainability with government regulators, with the government, federal government. There is a price for carbon emissions, and maybe it's a carbon tax, or maybe there's cap and trade. We need to do something with sign up for the Kyoto Protocol, whatever it is. There is a price to that, and we need to incorporate that. If you're buying coal energy, you need to pay. There should be a premium that you need to pay for coal energy, and we haven't done that, right? So right now, when you're buying electricity, and you're buying coal, or when you're buying oil, electricity, that's cheaper than solar. But what is the true cost of that? And we haven't incorporated that. So if it's a carbon tax or some other mechanism, we need to get there, and we need to make it clear what the true cost of all these sources of electricity are.
Okay. Back over here.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the physical infrastructure that's required to get some of this in place. Could you talk just a minute about the people infrastructure that you're looking at and some trends that you might be seeing in terms of green workforce development and how much that's growing for each of your industries or each of your organizations.
Ted, you're the people person here.
I in terms of growth of clean tech jobs, there's a lot of good research out there that I've read, but I'm not intimately familiar with, and there's stuff put out there in Clean Edge and other sources. The Pew Center for put out a research on green tech jobs, but I do think there's a fundamental change in how we think about what we do as a society, and I think there's some challenges in how we've approached it so far, in terms of whether you want to talk about past policies or even ERA funding now. That one of those challenges is getting people trained in the right way for this change in relationship with energy in particular. And I don't know. I mean, what I don't see emerging is I see like a lot of, like when you talk about this weatherization initiative by the DOE, I know, a city in the peninsula came to us and said, hey, we have energy efficiency auditors sitting on their hands. So here you have people who are trained, they have resources to, put out there to do this weatherization, and yet there's not that demand side, isn't that awareness isn't there yet. And so it's sort of it's a chicken or an egg thing, where even if you try and push those resources out there, even if you train up an entire weatherization force, and it all makes perfect sense, it's in our national interest, it makes sense economically, it makes sense environmentally, and yet there's still this lack of adoption because we really haven't thought about how to drive that demand and create that awareness. That's my take.
I have one question I want to pose to Scott here. The United States has been in the vanguard of sustainable energy, the development of solar technologies. Mm-hmm. Is the United States going to lose to China in terms of the dominance of the solar industry?
So I think my perspective, Suntech is a Chinese company. Well, interestingly enough, it's traded on the U.S. stock exchange. It's majority owned by U.S. investors, so it's not entirely Chinese. So I will say the U.S. will still lead in the innovation. I see China, their strength being manufacturing, low cost of human resource capital, and I still see the U.S. leading in innovating new technologies, and then China being able to scale that technology.
To make the money on it. Okay. Well, I think we've hit the end of the road here, but I wanted to thank you guys very much for this thing, and thank the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Peter, Scott, Cree, and Ted, thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your information. Just so you all know, even the National Park Service is working with the energy economy. We have some solar panels going up on the roof of the cell house of Alcatraz. So even we're getting into it. So we have a couple of sessions, concurrent sessions happening now. Right here in this room, we have disaster relief changing the game. And just outside the door on the patio is Designed for a Different Future. We're going to do about a 2 to 3 minute transition if we can. So please don't go away. We're going to start up in this room and right outside the door in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.